Good afternoon, everyone. Hello and welcome. On this dangerously cloudy evening. Hello, Sharon. Good evening to you. I'm just assessing the situation, looking at the storm clouds lowering over our heads in a very lowering way. Hello, Tricia. Afternoon to you. And hello, Carrie. Welcome to you all. I've just signed on early, as I always do, just to make sure that everything is in good working order. I might even take you for a little stroll while we're waiting. Oh, lots of machinery down there. They're actually working on the new sewer system. All very exciting. If you like sewers, which I do, almost as much as I like cemeteries. I don't know if there's a word that describes such a person, apart from weird. A sewerphile, possibly. I don't know. Sounds good enough to me. So I'm just looking at the clouds around us, which are increasingly grim and threatening. Hello, John. We're just looking at this delightful British weather. We've had it too good for too long. We've had a nice summer, but the rest of Europe is flooding, and it looks like we will be as well soon. Hello, Olivia. I'm just reviewing the situation, looking at the storm clouds brewing above our heads. It's all looking good. But there are patches of, well, not blue, but grey sky, which is probably as good as you can hope for. Oh, this is it. Look. This is the Thames Tideway Tunnel. This is what they're building down at Blackfriars Bridge. Building a new super sewage system that follows pretty much the course of Joseph Bazalgette's original 1880s sewer system. Goes through Battersea, past the Houses of Parliament. Hooray! We're finally going to get a decent sewer system. Past the London Eye, Tower Bridge. Then it has to slow down to 17 miles an hour. I didn't know there was a speed limit for sewage, but apparently there is, which is all very exciting. Or maybe it means something different. But to me, it looks like a speed limit. So we've still got about 10 minutes to go. I've just come on early to check out that everything's working okay. I've got my dead cat on, just in case it gets really windy, as it might, because the weather is, as you can see, very changeable. Luckily, I've got my umbrella with me, my ninja umbrella, which I can whip out at a moment's notice. Well, it'll probably be a little bit harder than that, but there we go. We'll cross that bridge when we burn it, as I like to say. Hello, David. Afternoon to you. We're just taking a little wander because I've signed on hugely early, of course, as always. Oh, another green man. So instead, I'm just taking you for a little stroll. You made it, just finished. No one, exactly, Tricia. No one wants speeding sewage. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. As you can see, it is a little windy. Well, you can't see it, but you could possibly hear it. Hopefully my dead cat will do a good job of muffling the sound. He normally does the job. So we're at Blackfriars, right next to some of the great financial institutions of the city. Like these ones. Oh, a mermaid. Here we are. The mermaids are. Hello, Tariq. Oh, I'm getting a slow connection. Oh, maybe I'm not meant to want. The internet reception has told me that I can't go that way. It doesn't like it. So I'm not gonna. Otherwise, I'll lose reception. I have to stick to the route. Otherwise, it all goes badly wrong. So we've got 8 minutes to go. And we will start on time as always. I was going to take you for a little stroll a bit further down, but I can't. The internet won't let me. The route that I normally take on this tour is pretty much tried and tested. But it seems like if I wander outside that route, then it's a bit dangerous. Hello, Barry. Afternoon to you. We're just admiring the beautiful British weather. Hoping that I won't get rained on tonight. According to the Met Office, I won't, but you never can trust the Met Office. I mean, you can trust them more than almost any other weather forecasting diagnostic tool, but that still doesn't mean much, unfortunately. So that's Blackfriars railway station there. And that's where you can go to get some of the greatest views of London. This glass platform provides views over the Thames, which are really breathtaking. And it's free, of course, providing you're catching a train somewhere. There's the Shard poking up in the distance, amid the grey and cloudy skies lowering above us. Green man. That. Tit. Sorry, I do apologise. Motorbike rider who decided he wasn't going to wait for the light, who just decided to rev at me. What an idiot. Now, normally I start the tour down here, but as you can see, there's a lot of gnarly borders down there. Oh, they've gone. They were there, I promise. They're all, oh, there they are. You see? Gnarly borders. He's going to fall off now when I'm filming him. So instead, we're going to start the tour up here, next to the crashing waves of the Thames. But we're not starting quite yet. Hello, Laurel. Good evening to you. We've still got 5 minutes to go. Oh, and thank you very much, Kerry, for your lovely early tip, which is don't ever do this again. Find a different job. No, sorry, it wasn't that kind of tip. Fortunately. Over there we've got weird buildings like the walkie-talkie building. Sea Containers, which is a very expensive hotel. I don't think you actually get put into a container, but at least I hope not anyway. So there we are. I've posted a link, which I will post again at various points, where you can tip me on PayPal and buy me a coffee, all of that stuff. Oh no, I've got a slow connection again. Oh dear. What's going on with the internet? The dark clouds are getting closer. But it's okay, because I have my ninja umbrella with me. Look, let's see if you can see my ninja umbrella. Where is it? There it is. There's my ninja umbrella. See, I'm carrying it over my shoulder. A kind of samurai umbrella that I can whip out at a moment's notice. That's the idea. So we should be okay. Hello everyone. Good evening. I've just been at work, as you can tell. Although the clouds are everywhere and it's really quite looking like it's going to rain, it's actually still quite humid. So I'm not quite looking as smart as I normally do. I do apologise. I've even taken my tie off. I've let my standards go completely. Hello, Deborah. Good evening to you. We're just talking about how I've let my standards go by taking off my tie. I'm not even wearing my scarf. There's St. Paul's poking out the top. So we've got about a couple of minutes to go, and we will start on time, as always. That's the old Blackfriars Bridge, by the way. That one was built in the 18th century. You can see the pillars that are all that's left of the old Blackfriars Bridge. And the rest of it was demolished. And then a new bridge was built. The one that I'm standing on, in fact. The colour of this bridge is a rather dirty red. And there's a reason for that. It's a kind of homage to the House of Lords. So most of the bridges in central London are different colours. And they tend to be red or green. Red for the Lords and green for the Commons. You see, there's my parliamentary reference. One of several during the day. So the clouds are looking horrible, but that's okay. I think we'll be all right. I have faith. Not in anything in particular, just faith in general, which is always a good thing to have. So here we are, on the banks of the Thames. And this is where our Dickens tour starts. And we're going to trace the early life of Charles Dickens. And one of the places that he knew really well was the river. And he knew this particular stretch of river really well because he used to work near here. Charles Dickens was born in 1812, the same year as Beethoven's fifth. And he was born in Portsmouth. So he wasn't born in London, but his family moved here when he was young. And at 12 years old, he was rather rudely introduced to the darker side of London. And that's because his father got into debt. John Dickens owed money. And at the time, if you owed money, you got put into prison, a debtor's prison. And that's where he was put, somewhere called Marshalsea Prison. And it was a terrible place. Equally terrible was the place where Charles Dickens was forced to work. At 12 years old, his family said he had to go and make some money to try and bail out his father and try and pay his debt so that he could get out of prison quicker. And he was put to work at another bridge just down the river. You can't see it because of this hoarding that's in the way. But it was a bridge called Hungerford Bridge, and it was equally horrible. And at the foot of that bridge, there was an old blacking factory. This was a factory that made shoe polish. And Charles Dickens, at the tender age of 12, was put to work in this factory. And he was made to put labels on tins of boot polish. Here's a picture of that factory. I say factory, it was more like an old run-down warehouse on the banks of the Thames. And this is where young Charles Dickens was forced to work for several months. He was working alongside very, very poor children, very, very poor people in general, apart from the owner of the blacking factory. And this, of course, gave him the kind of social conscience that he developed in his later stories. So this really helped him to write some of the stories that he wrote later in life. These pillars, by the way, are the remains of the old Blackfriars Bridge, built in the 18th century. Hello, Luann. Good evening to you. Good evening to everyone else that's joining us. So Charles Dickens was forced to work here at the blacking factory, sticking labels onto tins of boot polish. It was horrible, tedious, hard work. But even more than that, it was the place that he had to work that was so depressing. And years later, when he became rich and famous, he wrote some diaries about his experience. And the diaries give us an insight into what this place was really like. The blacking factory was the last house on the left-hand side, down at Old Hungerford Stairs. It was a crazy, tumble-down old house, abutting, of course, on the river, and literally overrun with rats. Its wainscoted rooms and its rotten floors and suitcases and staircases, and the old grey rats swarming down the cellars, and the sound of their squeaking and scuffling coming up the stairs at all times, and the dirt and decay of the place rise up visibly before me, as if I were there again. So this would be a really formative experience for Charles Dickens, one that he would remember long into his adult life. And it was a bit of a bad introduction to London. Things would get better, though. We're going to follow in the footsteps of Charles Dickens, heading towards the darkest part of the clouds. But it's okay, because I have my umbrella with me, just in case. And we're going to follow in the footsteps of Charles Dickens. In fact, it's not very difficult to follow in the footsteps of Dickens in London. And that's because Charles Dickens loved to walk. He would sometimes walk 10, 15 miles a day, and he would walk into the roughest areas of the city in order to get experience for the characters, noisy car, characters and places in his books. Unnecessarily noisy, that car. So to do that, we're walking back over Blackfriars Bridge. Now, Blackfriars Bridge is so called because of the monks that used to live and work here. They were the Dominican monks, otherwise known as the Blackfriars, hence the name. But this bridge had a different name at one point. And we'll see what that was here. So here's the plaque for Blackfriars Bridge. And it stands on the site of the original bridge, named after William Pitt the Elder in 1760, who was Prime Minister at the time. So it's a good job they didn't carry on that tradition Otherwise, we might have had Thatcher Bridge, Sir Keir Starmer Bridge, Boris Bridge. Well, I mean, we had Boris Bikes, so Boris Bridge wouldn't be that strange. But eventually it was rebuilt again in 1869 and opened by Her Majesty Queen Victoria. So this would have been the bridge that Charles Dickens knew in the later years of his life, but he would have also seen the earlier version of it as well. So we're going to head past Blackfriars Station, and I'm going to take you on a trip into the heart of the city. What I mean is the city with a capital C, the financial district, the beating heart of London's financial services. And we're also going to go to some places that Dickens knew very well, including somewhere where he worked as a junior solicitor. So we're going past the glass and steel modern incarnation of Blackfriars Station. It used to be called St. Paul's Station, but then it got really confused with St. Paul's Cathedral. Hello, Tomo. Good evening to you. We're just taking a walk down Blackfriars. We're heading towards Fleet Street, of Demon Barber fame. And in order to do that, we're going to go through some rather interesting places and interesting pubs, one of which you can see across the road. You'll get a chance to admire it because we'll be standing here for some hours. Eventually, the lights will change. But while we're waiting, you can see this strange kind of triangular shaped building here, at the bottom of which is a pub, a good oldie worldy British pub, and it's called the Blackfriars. So there's a whole Blackfriars theme going on in this area. The pub itself is really rather lovely, as we'll find out when we get closer to it. You can probably see the figure on top of it. It's a Dominican friar, one of the Black Friars that gave this area its name. See, told you, hours. We might end up doing the whole tour here. Who knows? The average Londoner spends around a third of their life waiting at traffic lights. That's the statistic that I've just completely made up, by the way, but it's probably true. So here we are. We'll get a closer look at the Blackfriars. Hello, Mystic. Good evening to you. We're here on a windy, cloudy, rainy day. Hopefully we'll survive. Let's find out. Here's the Blackfriars. There he is. There's the Dominican friar that gives this pub its name. People bravely standing outside for a post-work drink. What's great about this pub are the brass plaques that you find inside and outside, like this. Worthington Ales on draft. Here we go. I'm going to poke my camera through there. There we are. You see, proper oldie worldy English boozer. Hello, Jim. We're just passing an oldie worldy English boozer, one of several that we'll see along the way. And we're going to walk up Blackfriars Lane. So again, wherever you go in this area, you're confronted by this name, the Blackfriars. So they were a Dominican order of monks, friars that lived here in the 14th and 15th century. There were three main orders of friars that came here. The Dominicans were known as the Blackfriars. Then you had the Grey Friars. And then you had the White Friars, the Carthusians. So they came in all different shades and colours. Good evening to everyone that's joining us. We're taking a walk up Blackfriars Lane, so named because of its connection to the Dominican monks that used to live and work here. And they lived often in the greatest areas of need, the areas of biggest poverty. And this was one of them. Outside the financial district, there was a lot of poverty all around central London. Rookeries sprang up in Victorian times, dens of thieves, literally. So we're heading up Blackfriars Lane, and we're going to pass by a place that Dickens would have known very well. Dickens, of course, knew many places very well, but this was definitely one of them. This is the courtyard of the Royal Society of Apothecaries, the Guild of Apothecaries, based here since the 14th century. One of many guilds in central London. Every year, all these guilds come out. They come out to play for the Lord Mayor of London's great kind of procession that happens once a year when a new Lord Mayor is chosen. So this is the courtyard of the Royal Society of Apothecaries, formed in the 14th century. And it's a place that Dickens also would have known very well. And Dickens himself could well have worked here, because one of his skills was the ability to read people, to see and observe their symptoms, their behaviour. So he would have made a very good doctor himself. He could have been a lot of things. He could have been an actor, in the words of the musical. He could have been anything that he wanted to be, with all the talent he had. Name that musical. But he definitely could have been a doctor, because he had a knack for being able to observe people and their behaviours and their proclivities, if you like. I'll give you an example. In one of his most famous stories, in fact, his first story that gained financial and worldwide success, The Pickwick Papers, in 1836, he writes about a character. Pickwick Papers is all about an elderly, well-meaning middle-class gentleman who bumbles around from place to place and gets in all sorts of adventures. But in one of those adventures, he meets a character called the Fat Boy. I know it's not terribly politically correct, but there we go. And the Fat Boy makes recurrent appearances throughout the book. Here he is. Here's the Fat Boy. So the Fat Boy is a servant that works at the coaching houses where Mr. Pickwick passes through. And as he passes through, he becomes aware of this young man. And he realized that this young man has certain behaviors. One behavior is that he eats huge amounts and then falls asleep immediately afterwards. Time and again, the same pattern recurs. He eats a lot, then he falls asleep. Now, this was later given a proper medical name, and today that condition has been recognized by doctors, and it's called obese hyperventilation syndrome. So basically your body is starved of oxygen more than it normally should be after eating, and then you fall asleep. It's a kind of extension of the way that many of us feel after having a heavy meal in the afternoon. But it's also known by the doctors nowadays. Its nickname is Pickwick syndrome. So there we are, just to prove to you that Charles Dickens could have been a doctor. He could have worked at this Royal Society of Apothecaries. The society, by the way, was mainly responsible for vetting the goods that were coming in from the East Indies Company, the spices and the rare, precious fruits that were being transported here from the East Indies. And they would be the ones to kind of test them and find out what their properties were. So we're walking up some authentically cobbled streets. I do like a good cobbled street. And we're walking up Blackfriars Lane. And there is actually a reason why this is called Blackfriars Lane. And that's because this was the place where the original Blackfriars Friary was based. The Dominican monks. This was also the place that Anne Boleyn was questioned about her illicit relationships, about her possible witchcraft and incest. And she was formally questioned here near the friary. Not questioned by the monks, of course, that really wasn't their job. But you can see that round the corner. There's a blue plaque that marks the spot of this original priory. Site of the Priory of the Blackfriars, founded 1278. Not founded by Keith Burns. I think he's a dentist. No, I don't think he founded the priory. So let's just concentrate on that. Nothing to do with dentists. That was a red herring. But we're going to head along Blackfriars Lane and we're going to head out towards Fleet Street. The River Fleet used to flow from Blackfriars Bridge all the way to Highgate in North London. And it was one of the most infamous rivers in the city. It became congested, became like an open sewer, and people would throw anything they wanted to get rid of into it, including dead bodies or dead cows. There were lots of meat markets along the way here. And so they would use this river to dispose of their detritus. Oh, here we go. Let's give you a little view. The church that we're going to visit in a moment. It's called the Wedding Cake Church, otherwise known as St. Bride's. And we're going to take a closer peek at it in a little while. But first, I'm going to give you a little view of St. Paul's, just because we happen to be very close to it. And then we're going to head onto Fleet Street itself, which used to be the course of the Fleet River, as you probably guessed. There it is, all lit up now. The autumn evenings are drawing in. The cathedral gets lit up at night and looks quite beautiful. But sadly, we're not heading towards St. Paul's. We're heading in the opposite direction. And we're going to go to find Fleet Street and a couple of churches and a couple of pubs that are quite important in the life of Charles Dickens. So this part of the city has still managed to retain some of its more old-fashioned buildings, but most of it, as you can see, is glass and steel. And it's been this way for a long time now. But one man predicted that the City of London would look like this. And he predicted it way back in the 12th century. His name was Geoffrey Chaucer, the author of the Canterbury Tales. And in one of his poems, he talks about imagining London as a place made of glass towers that rise up above everything else. Oh, I know, Kathy. The energy bills must be insane. But many of these shops will leave their lights on all night. Partly as a deterrent to thieves, I suspect, but also as a kind of advertisement for all the people that are still wandering around London in the wee small hours. Every time I walk this way, I look at the little cupola at the top, and I wonder if it's a private flat with a golden statue on top of it. Must be quite a beautiful place to live, or even to work. So we're doing okay now. I have my ninja umbrella slung over my shoulder ready, just in case the rain breaks out. But it seems to be okay at the moment. It's threatening to rain, but not actually raining, which is fine by me. Oh, thank you, Mystic. You wouldn't want to actually see the streets through my eyes because I've got terrible eyesight. I actually have to take my glasses off when I do these tours. So I'm looking it through the lens of my phone, which has much better vision than I do. If I wasn't looking at it through the lens of my phone, I'd probably bump into things. And at best, everything would seem a blur. So yes, if I had laser surgery, then I would agree with you. Then it might be good to see it through my eyes. Scaffolding. There we are. My wish is complete. A parliamentary reference and scaffolding. I have nothing more to add. I might as well go home now. So we're going to head past some more of these oldie-worldy boozers, like the Crown and Sugarloaf. Lovely little pub. And we're heading up to the church that I mentioned earlier, the one called the Wedding Cake Church, St. Bride's. To get there, we're going past another lovely little boozer.
It's always what they call the October surprise.
Yay, scaffolding. Exactly. So it's great in London when you wander around these little courts and alleyways, because you often find interesting places, like the pub that we just passed. But one of those interesting places is this church, the Church of St. Bride's. And it's the oldest church on Fleet Street. In fact, it's known as the Ship of Fleet Street, because while all else has chopped and changed around it, this church has remained here. There used to be a place of worship here in Roman times. I'm literally bending over backwards for you. Isn't that nice of me? Oh, my back. So there you can see the wedding cake spire that gives the church its nickname, known as the Wedding Cake Church. And Dickens knew all about churches. Dickens actually wrote a book before he became famous. He did a study of London churches, and he wrote a kind of catalogue of these churches, hundreds of them, including what denomination they were, how many people you could fit in the church, what their opening times were. It was a kind of yellow pages of churches. And that shows the kind of attention to detail that he had, and that informs his novels as well. So in Great Expectations, the story opens in a churchyard. In Oliver Twist, Bill Sikes and Oliver hear the bells of St. Mary's in Sunbury as they're going on to commit their major crimes. So churches feature heavily in the tales of Charles Dickens. But we're leaving this lovely church behind. We're going to find another one. But to do that, we're heading onto Fleet Street itself. Fleet Street used to be the home of the newspaper magnates. All the newspapers were based here on this street. But in the reign of Maggie Thatcher, it all went wrong. The newspapers got unionised. Maggie Thatcher didn't like the unions at all. And so there were all sorts of problems. And eventually the newspapers moved out. You can still see on the walls of some of these buildings the names of the newspapers that used to have their offices here. Wow, look at this. We've got lots of scaffolding everywhere, and cranes as well, just to add to the fun. What are they building? There we are. Flagship court facility. Private housing for the incredibly wealthy. So we've got to walk down this long, dark scaffolding. Only put up in the last couple of years. It's not exactly antique. I do apologise. It's Not exactly the most exciting part of the tour. But we are following the course of the River Fleet. Eventually, this disgusting river was boarded over and it was turned into a sewer, part of Joseph Bazalgette's sewer system. So the original river still flows under our feet, much cleaner than it was before. Even though it's a sewer, it's still cleaner than it was in the early 19th century. It's also where Fagin's lair was meant to be, here on this street. A place called Saffron Hill. That was where Dickens based the lair of Fagin, the head of the pickpockets. There's another oldie-worldy pub, the Tipperary, an Irish-themed pub, as you can probably guess. Now, there was a shop here that used to give an indication of the notoriety of this street, because it was this street that was meant to hold the famous or infamous barber shop of Sweeney Todd. Unfortunately, that barber shop is now gone. They've moved, and instead, Sweeney Todd has now gone veggie. There we are, it's a sign of the times. So there used to be a barbershop here called Sweeney Todd's Barbershop that gave you the closest shave of your life. And now it's sadly gone veggie. And it's gone to love cows. Not quite sure what that is. I am Volya. Love cows. There we are. Go veggie, save the planet. Sweeney Todd would not have approved. So this is where James Malcolm Rymer wrote his original story in the 1840s. And it was called A String of Pearls. And it would inspire the legend of Sweeney Todd. It is a legend, by the way, obviously. Some people think that Sweeney Todd was a real person. But obviously, it wasn't. It was made up by a penny dreadful writer called James Malcolm Rymer. So we've got more of these courts heading off down every street. Lots of little courts and alleys. And some of them contain very interesting pubs. We've already seen a couple of them, but we're going to see another one in a moment as the light fades. And we'll also see a very famous church called St. Dunstan's in the West. And that was the scene of a story by Charles Dickens. And it was also meant to be the scene of Sweeney Todd's barbershop. His barbershop was meant to be located right next to the church. Now, I'm just wondering, have I come too far? Have I passed the pub that I wanted to show you? I probably have. Let's go back this way. You see, that's what happens when you don't wear your glasses. You end up walking past the pub you were looking for. It's a sad case of affairs. There you can see St. Paul's again. Hello, Joy. I'm just getting hopelessly lost because I've taken my spectacles off and I'm relying on my phone vision, which, as you can see, doesn't always do the job. But what I'm going to show you, having walked past it, is quite an important pub in the history of Fleet Street. Vegetarian swing, I know, exactly. Completely outrageous. Sweeney Todd would turn in his grave. So there are lots of pubs with interesting names in London, but this is one of my favourites. This is called Ye Olde Cheshire Cheese. Now, it's not to be confused with the Cheshire Cheese, because there's also a pub called that. But this one is Ye Olde. And they're having a restock, as you can see. There's Ye Olde Cheshire Cheese. And it actually deserves the name, because it is pretty old. This is a list of kings and queens under whose reign this pub was standing. The reign of Charles II, James II, William III, and George, William, George, Edward, Elizabeth, and down at the bottom, Charles III. Hello, Penny. Hello, Saloon. We're just looking at one of the oldest pubs on Fleet Street, Ye Olde Cheshire Cheese. And it's a pub with a long and glorious history. As you can see, when we go down this alleyway. Now, of course, it's getting dark at the moment, so I'm going to have to employ my light to show you this. Wine Office Court. So lots of famous people have drunk here. Voltaire, Congreve, Pope, Johnson, Oliver Goldsmith, Macaulay Tennyson, Theodore Roosevelt, Chesterton, Symonds, Beerbohm, Tree, Wilkie Collins, the list goes on, and Dickens, of course. There he is. Dickens has also drunk here. One of the people who drank here was Dr. Johnson, the great lexicographer. And this is what he wrote about London. Sir, if you wish to have a just notion of the magnitude of this great city, you must not be satisfied with seeing its great streets and squares, but must survey the innumerable little lanes and courts. Hello, Anna Hadda. Good evening to you. We're just looking at a very old pub, and it's called Ye Olde Cheshire Cheese, which kind of gives you an idea of how old it is. And it was in this pub, as if it wasn't famous enough for having lots of people throughout history drinking here, it was also famous for its most important resident, who wasn't even human. It was a parrot. There was an African grey parrot that used to be a pet in this pub. Here he is. His name was Polly. I know, not terribly original. And Polly, the famous African grey parrot, was one of those parrots that could speak. And he would. The trouble is that the landlord had taught him lots of swear words. So he would be able to swear in lots of different languages. And that's what he did for many years, until he died when they nailed him to his perch. I know, there is a Monty Python scene coming on here. This is an ex-parrot. It has ceased to be. It has gone to join the choir invisible. Anyway, enough of that. So Polly still sits in this pub. Luckily, he doesn't swear anymore because he can't. But he's still there. Polly the parrot from the oldie Cheshire Cheese. But we're heading on towards a very famous church that I mentioned earlier, the Church of St. Dunstan's in the West. And this church is partly famous because of Dickens, and partly famous because of Sweeney Todd. Polly is well and truly stuffed. Exactly, Claire. I couldn't have put it better myself. So along the way, everyone, I'm also going to leave various links where you can tip me on PayPal, buy me a coffee, and you can also find a link to my groups. You could do it as well by clicking on the chain link symbol that takes you to the PayPal page. But we're going to take a peek at this church, the Church of St. Dunstan's in the West. And it stood here for a long time. And it was one of the churches that was rebuilt after the Great Fire of London in 1666. And it's famous because Charles Dickens wrote a story about it. It was one of his most famous Christmas stories. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking A Christmas Carol. But it isn't. Charles Dickens actually wrote sequels to A Christmas Carol. You know what it's like nowadays, everything has to have a sequel. And it was the same back then. He scored a hit with A Christmas Carol, so he decided to try and score a hit with other Christmas stories as well. And one of them was called The Chimes. And The Chimes is set in this church. So again, Dickens used a church that he knew well as the setting for this story. And The Chimes is a story of retribution and forgiveness. It's very similar to A Christmas Carol, but there's a different kind of theme to it. Instead of being confronted by three ghosts, the protagonist meets goblins. I know, sounds even cooler, doesn't it? And the goblins live up in the spire of this church. And they're the ones that eventually help the character to see the error of his ways and teach him to be a good man. So again, it's one of those stories with a nice moral. So this is the Church of St. Dunstan's. And it's the setting, as I said, for this famous story by Dickens called The Chimes. Here you are. You can see the protagonist being assaulted by the sound of the goblins in the bells. The goblins that live up in the spire of this church. And this is what Dickens wrote about it. They were old chimes. Trust me. Centuries ago, these bells had been baptized by bishops. So many centuries ago, in fact, that the register of their baptism was long lost before the memory of man, and no one knew their names. So this was the setting for his 1844 story, The Chimes, which didn't get the same kind of success as A Christmas Carol. Right next to it is where Sweeney Todd's barbershop was meant to be located. Where the People's Friend used to be, the Dundee Journal. Again, this was the place where newspapers used to be based. And that was also meant to be the place where Sweeney Todd's barbershop was. And underneath are cellars that connect to the church. And it was in these cellars that Sweeney Todd used to store the bodies of the people he murdered, to be made into cakes and buns and meat pies by Mrs. Lovett. So this is a story with a kind of dual literary heritage. But while Fleet Street is quite noisy and industrial at a time like this, in fact at most times during the day, there is a place just off Fleet Street that Dickens knew very well indeed. And it's a place that he described as somewhere where sound was not allowed. You would enter here and leave the world behind. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to go down one of these little alleyways and find our way into the inner temple, the legal heartland of Victorian London. And it's a place that anyone can visit, but you have to know how to get there. There is a main entrance, but the main entrance is closed at a certain time. So it helps if you know the little side entrances, the little side streets that will lead you there. Luckily, I know them. And I'm going to take you down one in a moment. This one, Playdale Court. And if we walk down Playdale Court, we'll find this area that Charles Dickens described as a place where sound is not allowed. Charles Dickens, by this time, you can see, I've only gone a few steps, and already the sound of the traffic has died away. Charles Dickens may have had a really difficult childhood. When he was 12, he worked in the blacking factory, putting labels on tins of shoe polish. His father was in prison. But eventually his life started to get better. And at the age of 16, he became an apprentice, a legal apprentice, working for a local company of solicitors. And he used to visit all of the Inns of Court in London. There are 3 Inns of Court, and every solicitor in England and Wales has to belong to one of them. They have to be kind of officially registered, taking the bar, as it's called. Here's Charles Dickens, looking very young and handsome. And he was a hit in the office where he worked because he was so good at making impressions of the people he worked with, especially the seniors, making satirical caricatures of them. He was a gifted actor, and later in his life, he would find huge acclaim reading from his many works in front of audiences of thousands all around the world, even traveling to America to do that. So these Victorian houses have remained unchanged for quite a long time. And the cobbled street that you can see down here. Hello, Stephanie. We're just walking down a cobbled street. Very oldie-worldy around here. We're passing by these buildings that look out onto the inner temple. And this used to be the home of the legal profession. In fact, it still is in some ways. Many solicitors make their homes here. Past yet another oldie-worldy pub. There's many of these oldie-worldy pubs around this area. It's a good place to come on a pub crawl. You wouldn't have far to crawl between pubs because there are a lot of them. But we're going around the corner and we're going again into this area where Charles Dickens would have come on business as a young solicitor's aide. So this is the inner temple. Hello. So this is the inner temple. These lamps, by the way, are original gas lamps. There's something like 5,000 original gas lamps still in London, all maintained by a special company, by British Gas. And they give the place an authentic Victorian feel. So this is the inner temple and the middle temple. And this is an area that Charles Dickens knew very well. He used to come here on work. He worked for a solicitor's firm, and he used to be sent on errands all around this area. And it's called the Inner Temple because it was originally a place for the Knights Hospitaller. And they had their offices here. They had a temple, literally, in the middle of this area. We'll see if we can track it down on our way. So the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller both used to use this as their headquarters. The Knights Templar, as you probably know, were King John's kind of private religious army. They were like the SAS of medieval times. They would go into the Crusades and fight like mad things, all in the name of God, of course, all in a good cause. Here's one of them. These were the Knights Templar, and they built a temple here. And it became the centre point of this area. But eventually in the 17th century, the lawyers moved in, and that began to change the nature of this area. And Charles Dickens knew the long and illustrious history of this area very well. And he wrote about it again in his diaries. There are still worse places yet than the temple on a sultry day, for basking in the sun or resting idly in the shade. There is yet a drowsiness in its courts and a dreamy dullness in its trees and gardens. Those who pace its lanes and squares may yet hear the echoes of their footsteps on the sounding stones, and read upon its gates in passing from the tumult of the Strand or Fleet Street, who enters here leaves noise behind. Why is there a blue cone? Now here again I have to rely on your eyesight better than mine. Where is a blue cone? I'm intrigued. I want to know about the blue cone now. But I don't know where it is, Sarah. I don't know which blue cone you're referring to. Otherwise I would tell you, I'm sure. Oh, those blue cones. I can see blue cones now. It's all right, you're not imagining things. Yes, these are special inner temple cones that obviously are used for various parking restrictions. That's my answer, and I'm sticking with it. I know, the cones are usually red. It's all rather confusing. So Charles Dickens came here as a young solicitor, and he used to love to come to the Inner Temple especially. It was a place that he knew the history of. He knew that it had once been a medieval temple as well. He knew it had people buried here around the central church. And I'm going to take us a little bit further into this inner temple. There we are, Sarah. Good enough for you. Exactly. May not be the exactly right answer, but you know, it's near enough. And that's always, of course, my philosophy when I do my research for my tours. Is it true? If it's not, is it near enough? Yes, that will probably do. You see, exhaustive research I do. All for you. So I'm going to take us a little bit further into the inner temple. So these are now private flats, and many members of the legal profession still work here and still live here, which must be rather nice to be in this area of peace and tranquility, so close to the city outside. Here's the main hall. Again, this was used by the Guild of Templars. And then the Guild of Hospitallers used it as well. The inner temple itself, you can see here, this round building. If you've ever watched Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, they used this building in that film, a place where they find one of the clues that leads them to the location of the Holy Grail. So this is quite a famous building. This round building here is the inner temple itself. So Charles Dickens loved to come here and soak up the atmosphere. He liked the place, but he wasn't so keen on the people that worked in it. There is yet in the temple something of a clerky, monkish atmosphere, which public offices of law have not disturbed, and even legal firms have failed to scare away. These sequestered nooks are the public offices of the legal profession, where writs are issued, judgments signed, declarations filed, and numerous other ingenious machines put in motion for the torture and torment of His Majesty's liege subjects, and the comfort and emolument of the practitioners of the law. So as you can see, he didn't have a great relationship with lawyers, even though he wanted to be one himself at one point. He actually trained for the bar, and he was about to be offered a place at the Inner Temple. But in 1836, he had a hit with the Pickwick Papers, and that changed the direction of his life completely. Otherwise, he could well have become a lawyer, and we might have lost one of the greatest authors of all time to the legal profession. As it is, in his stories and books, the legal profession take a bit of a battering, and it's clear that he had rather a lot of disdain for them. In novels like Bleak House, he talks about the convoluted lawyer system that caused so many problems for the characters in his novels. So we're really quite lucky that he decided not to go into the legal profession and decided to become an author instead. As much as he loved wandering in these courtyards and listening to the history of this amazing place, it's good that he eventually decided to become an author instead. So, ladies and gentlemen, as the night falls around us, we have managed to escape the rain. So I haven't even needed to use my ninja umbrella, which is really good. I'm glad that I brought it. In fact, if I didn't bring it, I'm sure that it would have rained. That's the kind of thing that happens. So thank you all very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the tour. If you have, then please show your appreciation. Again, I'm going to leave that link up there with the links to PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee. And all that remains for me for the moment is to say thank you all very much for coming. I hope you've enjoyed our little walk through the early life of Charles Dickens. I may do a sequel at some point and talk about the later life of Charles Dickens, for which we'll go a little bit further up the road. But for now, thank you all for coming, and I look forward to seeing you on many other tours in the future. Of course, you probably know I've got all my creepy tours coming up in the October season. All sorts of spookiness going on in the next month. But for now, thank you all for coming, and I wish you a very good evening. Thank you, and good night.